An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She lost a bet. She woke up in a millionaire's bed. But what seemed like a forbidden scandal hides a childhood secret that could destroy everything. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The bell of St. Benedict's Church echoed through the sunny morning in Hope Springs, cutting through the humid air of Tennessee with its familiar melody. Sarah Mitchell adjusted the collar of her white blouse, checking in the mirror to make sure the fabric adequately covered her shoulders. At 28, she had mastered the art of dressing like a shadow, present but imperceptible, discreet, enough not to provoke comments, appropriate enough to honor the family name. The house where she grew up still held the scent of lavender that her mother used on the sheets, even 10 years after her death. Her father, Pastor Robert Mitchell, kept everything exactly as Elizabeth had left it. The lace curtains in the living room, the picture frames scattered across the bookshelf, the Bible open on the center table, always on the same page. Proverbs, chapter 31. The Virtuous Woman. Sarah knew those verses by heart. Her mother recited them every morning before combing her brown hair and braiding it carefully. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The words echoed in her mind as she descended the creaking wooden stairs. In the kitchen, coffee was ready. Her father had already left for his morning commitments at the church, leaving a note on the table. "Daughter, don't forget the council meeting this afternoon. Your presence is important." Sarah sighed. It was always important. Her presence, her opinion, her example. She was the pastor's daughter, the respected teacher, the single woman who chose to serve God and education. At least that's how everyone saw her life. The truth was more complex. Sarah hadn't chosen to be single. She simply never found someone who justified the risk of disappointing her father or tarnishing her mother's memory. The few men who showed interest were gently discouraged by the invisible barriers she had erected around herself. It was easier to live protected by others' expectations than to face her own desires. St. Francis Academy was a 10-minute walk from the Mitchell house. Sarah had been making that journey for 6 years since she graduated with a degree in literature and returned home. She could have stayed in Nashville, where she studied, or even tried an opportunity in Chicago. But the weight of family responsibility brought her back to Hope Springs, where she became the most beloved and respected literature teacher in town. The school was a renovated colonial building with white walls and blue windows that framed the view of the mountains in the background. Sarah greeted her colleagues in the teacher's lounge and headed to her first class of the day. High school seniors, her favorite students, almost adults, capable of deep discussions about the classics of American literature. "Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne and the complexity of human relationships in his novels." Sarah wrote the author's name on the board with her neat handwriting. "Can anyone tell me what makes Hawthorne's characters so fascinating?" Amber, a student with curly hair and clever eyes, raised her hand. "Teacher, I think it's because they're contradictory. They do things they know they shouldn't do, but they do them anyway." "Excellent observation, Amber. And why do you think people act against their own principles?" Sarah leaned on the desk, genuinely interested in the young people's answers. "Because sometimes desire is stronger than reason," replied Jason, a shy boy who rarely participated in discussions. Like Dimsdale in The Scarlet Letter, he knew he was being hypocritical, but he couldn't stop. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. How many times had she herself felt desires that went against everything she believed to be right? How many nights had she lain awake imagining what it would be like to kiss someone passionately, to be desired, to be seen as a woman and not just as an example of virtue? Very well observed, Jason. Hawthorne was a master at portraying these internal conflicts. He understood that human beings are complex, full of contradictions and repressed desires. She paused, realizing that perhaps she was talking more about herself than about literature. "For our next class, I want you to read the first chapter of The House of the Seven Gables. We'll discuss how American Gothic addresses these human passions in an even more direct way. The bell rang, indicating the end of class. The students left chatting animatedly, and Sarah remained alone organizing her papers. It was moments like these that she liked best, when she could talk about deep feelings through literature, when she could touch on topics she would never dare address in other circumstances. In the teacher's lounge, her colleagues were discussing weekend plans. Jessica, the physical education teacher and the most extroverted of the group, was organizing something special. "Guys, you won't believe it. I got an incredible discount for a resort in the mountains. It's for my cousin's bachelorette party, but she said I can bring some friends." Jessica looked directly at Sarah. "Sarah, you need to come. When was the last time you left this town?" Sarah felt her face heat up. Jessica, you know that's not really my scene." "Exactly why you need to go." Rachel, the math teacher, joined the conversation. "Sarah, you're 28 and you live like you're 80. Your mother wouldn't want you to lock yourself in a bubble forever." The mention of her mother touched a sensitive point. Elizabeth Mitchell had been a woman full of life before marrying the pastor. Sarah had vague memories of her mother dancing in the kitchen while cooking, singing songs that weren't religious hymns, laughing loudly when she thought no one was listening. "It's just one weekend, Sarah," insisted Jessica. "5-star resort, spa, pool, good food. You can relax, read a book by the pool. You don't even need to participate in the bachelorette games." Sarah hesitated. Part of her, a small but persistent part, was curious. When had been the last time she had done something just for herself, without thinking about others' opinions? "I need to think about it." "There's nothing to think about." Jessica clapped her hands. "It's decided. I'll pick you up Friday afternoon. It's going to be amazing, you'll see." The rest of the week passed in a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Sarah told her father about the invitation, omitting the details about the bachelorette party and emphasizing the aspect of rest and socializing with colleagues. Pastor Robert seemed satisfied to know that his daughter had finally accepted a social invitation. On Friday, Sarah packed a small suitcase with conservative clothes, long-sleeved blouses, a skirt that went down to her knees, the one-piece swimsuit she used on rare visits to the town club's pool. She also packed some books, imagining she would spend most of her time reading while the others had fun. The resort was nestled in the Tennessee mountains, 3 hours from Hope Springs. During the trip, Jessica and the other colleagues talked animatedly about the plans for the night, mentioning music, drinks, and games that Sarah had no idea what they were. She began to regret her decision, but it was too late to turn back. When they arrived at the resort, Sarah was impressed. The place was even more luxurious than Jessica had described. Impeccable gardens, modern architecture integrated with nature, an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the mountain horizon. She had never been in a place like this. The room she would share with Jessica was spacious and elegant, with a stunning view of the valley. Jessica immediately began taking clothes out of her suitcase, short dresses, tiny bikinis, high heels, that Sarah could never wear. "Sarah, did you bring anything more festive?" Jessica held up one of Sarah's blouses, frowning. "I brought what I have," Sarah replied, slightly embarrassed. "Relax, we'll improvise. You have a beautiful body. You just need to show a little more." Jessica began rummaging through her own luggage. "Here, try this on." It was a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, with a neckline that Sarah would never dare to wear. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized her own image. The dress accentuated her curves in a way that her usual clothes hid, and the color highlighted the golden tone of her brown eyes. "Wow, Sarah, you look beautiful." Jessica clapped her hands. "Now let's do your makeup." Sarah let herself be carried away by the moment. Maybe it was the change of environment, maybe the excitement of her friends, but for the first time in years she felt different. She wasn't the pastor's daughter. She wasn't the exemplary teacher. She was just Sarah, a 28-year-old woman trying something new. The bachelorette party was happening in the resort's main hall. When they went downstairs, Sarah was shocked by the number of people. It wasn't just the bride's family, it seemed like an open event, with loud music, an open bar, and a much more intense atmosphere than she had imagined. Jessica, you didn't. Say there would be so many people, Sarah whispered, feeling too exposed in the borrowed dress. Relax, it'll be fun. Look, my cousin is over there. Jessica waved to a blonde woman wearing a tiara that said bride in golden rhinestones. Come on, I'll introduce you. The next 2 hours passed in a confusion of introductions, superficial conversations, and polite refusals of champagne glasses. Sarah felt like a stranger observing a world that wasn't hers. The women laughed loudly, danced without modesty, spoke openly about subjects that made her blush. It was when the games began that she tried to hide. The bride had prepared a series of games that involved intimate questions, embarrassing challenges and punishments for those who refused to participate. Sarah tried to discreetly move away, but Jessica stopped her. Where are you going? The fun is just beginning. I don't feel comfortable with this kind of thing. Come on, Sarah. It's just a game. You promised to loosen up a little tonight. Remember? Sarah didn't remember making such a promise, but she found herself dragged back to the group. The game was a kind of circle where each person drew a card with a challenge. Whoever refused to comply had to accept a punishment decided by the group. When Sarah's turn came, her hands trembled as she picked up the card. She read it silently first, and her face paled. The card said, "Choose an unknown man at the resort and invite him to dinner in a private location. If you refuse, accept any invitation you receive until dawn." I can't do that. Sarah tried to return the card, but the group had already read over her shoulder. Then you accept the punishment, shouted the bride, already affected by the champagne. Rules are rules! What punishment? Sarah asked, fearing the answer. You have to accept any invitation you receive until the sun rises. Any invitation, no exceptions. Sarah felt the world spin. How had she gotten herself into this situation? She wanted to run away, go home, back to the safety of her predictable life. But she was surrounded by expectant looks, and Jessica held her arm firmly. All right, she murmured, barely believing her own words. I accept. The group vibrated, as if she had just accepted an extreme challenge. In fact, that's exactly what it was. For someone who had never made an impulsive decision, it was like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was a safety net. For the next hour, Sarah was tense, waiting for someone to approach her. Some people made small talk, but nothing that could be characterized as a proper invitation. She began to relax, thinking that perhaps she would go unnoticed for the rest of the night. That's when he appeared. Sarah was alone on the terrace, getting some fresh air and observing the city lights in the valley, when she heard a voice behind her. Excuse me for interrupting, but you don't seem to be having much fun. She turned and found a tall man with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, casual enough not to seem too formal, elegant enough not to go unnoticed. There was something in his posture that conveyed confidence without arrogance, a presence that occupied the space without invading it. I'm not much for parties, Sarah responded, suddenly conscious of every detail of her appearance. I imagine. You have the air of someone who prefers a good book to loud music. He approached the railing beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. I'm Michael, by the way. Sarah, she hesitated before completing, and you're right about the book. What kind of book? The simple question disarranged Sarah's defenses. No one ever asked about her books with genuine curiosity. Classics. Literature, mainly. I just reread The House of the Seven Gables to prepare for a class. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Raw American Gothic, characters shaped by their environment. Michael smiled, and Sarah realized it wasn't a polite smile, but that of someone who really knew literature. It must be interesting to teach about human passions through the classics. You know American literature. Let's say I had an eclectic education. There was something evasive in the response, but also a tone of intimacy that made Sarah feel special. And you? Did you always want to be a teacher? Sarah thought about the answer. Always? Or had she simply followed the safest path, the most approved, the most suitable for a pastor's daughter? I like teaching, but sometimes I Wonder what it would be like to have made different choices. Different choices like what? I don't know, living in a big city, meeting different people, having experiences that... She stopped, realizing she was saying more than she intended to a complete stranger. That were yours, not other people's. Michael completed her thought with a precision that frightened her. They were silent for a few minutes, observing the lights in the valley. Sarah felt strangely comfortable in his presence, as if they were old acquaintances resuming an interrupted conversation. Sarah, Michael turned to look at her, I know this might be forward of me, but would you like to have dinner with me? There's a private restaurant on the top floor, incredible view, quieter atmosphere. I promise it's nothing more than good. Conversation and good food. Sarah's heart raced. There was the invitation she had promised to accept, but that wasn't what made her nervous. It was the fact that, even without the promise, she wanted to accept. For the first time in her life, she wanted to say yes to something she didn't know where it would lead. Yes, I'd love to. Michael's smile was genuine, with no traces of cheap conquest or easy victory. Perfect. How about in an hour? That gives you time to let your friends... know you're okay. Sarah agreed and returned to the party hall to tell Jessica about the dinner. Her friend was euphoric, interpreting the situation as a great personal victory. I told you that you needed to loosen up. Who is he? Is he handsome? Does he seem to have money? Jessica, it's just dinner. Of course it is, Jessica winked. Have fun, Sarah. You deserve it. An hour later, Sarah met Michael in the elevator that led to the restaurant. He had changed clothes. Now he wore a dark blazer over his shirt, elegant without being ostentatious. When the elevator doors closed, she realized she was alone with a man she barely knew, something she had never done in her life. The restaurant was even more impressive than Michael had described. Only a few tables, soft lighting, a panoramic view of the mountains under the starry sky. The maitre d' led them to a table in the most secluded corner, as if Michael were a special client. Do you come here often? Sarah asked as she sat down. Let's say I have some business in the region. The answer was vague again, but Michael's tone didn't suggest mystery for mystery's sake, more like someone who was used to not talking much about himself. During dinner, they talked about books, movies, travels. Michael was cultured, well-informed, but there was a quality in the way he listened that impressed Sarah more than anything he said. He asked questions that led her to talk about herself in ways she had never talked to anyone. Have you never wanted to leave your town? He asked as they shared a dessert. I always thought my place was there. My family, my church, my students, they all depend on me in some way. But what about you? What do you depend on? The question left her without an answer for a moment. What did she depend on? Her father's approval, her mother's memory, the security of a life without surprises. I never thought about it that way, she admitted. Maybe you should. You're more interesting than you think, Sarah. There was something in the way he said her name that made her stomach contract. It wasn't cheap seduction. It was recognition, as if he saw something in her that she didn't know existed. After dinner, they walked on the hotel terrace. The night was perfect, with a gentle breeze and a sky full of stars that they rarely could see so clearly in urban places. Thank you. For the evening, Sarah said when they stopped near the elevator. It was different from anything I've ever experienced. Different how? I don't know how to explain it. I felt free, as if I could be myself without fear of judgment. Michael moved a little closer, without invading her personal space, but enough for her to smell his perfume, something masculine and sophisticated, nothing exaggerated. And how is yourself, Sarah? The question echoed in the air between them like a challenge. How was she herself? She had been playing roles. For so long, obedient daughter, exemplary teacher, virtuous woman, that she had almost forgotten who she was underneath all those layers. I don't know, she whispered. How about we find out together? When Michael leaned in to kiss her, Sarah knew she should step back, should apologize and leave, should remember everything she had learned about proper behavior and reputation. Instead, she closed her eyes and let his lips find hers. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, as if Michael were testing her reactions. But when she didn't pull away, When her hands found his chest by instinct, the kiss deepened. There were years of repression in that kiss, years of unsatisfied curiosity, of denied desires, of unanswered questions. When they finally separated, they were both breathless. Sarah felt as if she were waking from a long dream or entering one. "Sarah," Michael's voice was hoarser, "do you want to come up with me? Just to talk, nothing more. I promise you can leave whenever you want." She knew she should say no. She knew that going up to a stranger's room went against everything she believed was right. But she also knew that this was the first time in her adult life that she really wanted something. Not what was expected of her, not what would be appropriate, but something she deeply desired. "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I want to." Michael's suite occupied the entire top floor of the resort. When the elevator doors opened directly into the apartment, Sarah was impressed with the discreet luxury, designer furniture, artwork on the walls, a 360-degree view of the mountains. "Wow," she murmured, turning slowly to absorb it all. "It's not mine," Michael said quickly, as if he wanted to avoid her judging him for ostentation. "It's a company property. I use it when I need to isolate myself to work." "What kind of work do you do?" "Technology, nothing very exciting." He served 2 glasses of red wine, offering one to her. "And you? Did you always want to teach literature?" Sarah accepted the glass, although she rarely drank alcohol. "I always liked to read. Teaching was viewed the most practical option." Practical or safe? The question hit her like a sure shot. "Both, I imagine." They sat on the spacious sofa facing the panoramic windows. Sarah maintained a respectful distance, but she could feel the heat of Michael's body next to hers. "May I ask you a personal question?" Michael turned to face her. "You may." "Have you ever been in love?" Sarah almost choked on the wine. Why do you want to know?" "Curiosity. You have a way of talking about life, about choices, that makes me think you've never allowed yourself to feel some things." It was true, but admitting it out loud seemed to expose too much of herself. "And you, have you ever been in love?" "Once, or at least I thought so." Michael twirled the glass between his hands. "I discovered that I was more in love with the idea of her than with who she really was." "How so?" "She was perfect on paper, beautiful, intelligent, from the right family. But when I tried to really know her, I discovered there wasn't much beyond the surface. Or maybe I didn't know how to ask the right questions." Sarah thought about her own life, how she had always strived to be perfect in the role of pastor's daughter, of exemplary teacher. Was she also nothing more than a well-constructed surface? And now, she asked, are you still looking for someone to fall in love with? Michael studied her for a long moment before answering. "I'm not looking, but sometimes we find things when we least expect." The intensity in his gaze made Sarah feel exposed, as if he could see through all her carefully constructed defenses. It was scary and exciting at the same time. "Sarah," Michael moved closer, but still keeping enough distance that she didn't feel pressured. "May I kiss you again?" Instead of answering, she leaned toward him. This time the kiss was more intense, from the beginning, loaded with the tension that had accumulated throughout the night. Michael's hands found her face, his fingers entwining in her hair, and Sarah found herself responding with a passion she didn't know she possessed. When they finally separated, she was lying partially on his chest, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, his hands resting lightly on her back. "I'm confused," she admitted. "I've never felt like this before." "How are you feeling?" Sarah thought about the answer. How was she feeling? Scared, excited, guilty, free, all at the same time. "Like I'm waking up from a very long sleep." Michael smiled, and there was something tender in that smile that made her heart tighten. "Then let's take it slow. It doesn't need to be anything more than what you want it to be." But when he kissed her again, Sarah knew she had already passed the point of no return. 28 years of repression, of unasked questions, of denied desires, were crumbling, like a dam yielding to the pressure of accumulated water. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt almost by their own instinct, and when Michael pulled, a way to look into her eyes seeking confirmation, she didn't hesitate. "I want to," she whispered. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want." What happened next changed Sarah in ways she couldn't have predicted. It wasn't just the physical act, although it was more intense and meaningful than anything she had imagined in her most intimate moments of fantasy. It was the feeling of being seen, of being desired, of being valued not for what she represented but for who she was. Michael was patient, careful, but also passionate in a way that made Sarah feel as if she were discovering a new language. Each touch, each kiss, each moment of intimacy was a revelation about herself, about what her body could feel, about what her heart could endure. When they finally fell asleep, Sarah was nestled against Michael's chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in her adult life, she felt completely relaxed, as if she had found a place where she could simply exist without performance, without expectations, without fear. But when she woke up the next morning, Michael was no longer there. The first ray of sun that came through the curtains of the suite found Sarah alone among silk sheets that still held Michael's scent. She woke up slowly, her body aching in a way she had never experienced, a mixture of residual pleasure and the raw reality of what had happened the night before. For a moment, she remained motionless, eyes closed, trying to process the transformation she felt within herself. It was as if a completely new version of herself had emerged from the ashes of the woman she was just 24 hours before. Her hands moved over her own body beneath the sheets, recognizing each mark, each sensation that Michael had left on her skin. When she finally opened her eyes and realized she was alone, a mixture of panic and disappointment took hold of her. Chest. She sat up in bed, pulling the sheets to cover her bare breasts, and looked around the suite for signs that Michael was still there. Her clothes were carefully folded on an armchair, but there was no trace of him. That's when she saw the paper on the nightstand beside her. A sheet of the resort's letterhead paper, with a masculine and firm handwriting. It was real. "I need to resolve something. Wait for me. M." Sarah read and reread the few words, trying to decipher what they really meant. Wait for him where? For how long? And what did that "it was real" mean? Was it a confirmation that the night had been special for him too, or just a polite way of saying goodbye? She got up slowly, each movement of her body reminding her of the intimacy they had shared. In the suite's bathroom, she found luxury hygiene products and allowed herself a long, hot bath, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that dominated her. Shame, ecstasy, confusion, desire, everything mixed in an intensity that left her dizzy. When she went downstairs to meet Jessica and the other colleagues for breakfast, Sarah knew she carried on her face all the marks of what had happened. Jessica spotted her crossing the restaurant and her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Sarah, you look different." Jessica stood up from the table where she was having breakfast with Rachel and the others. "Tell me everything, now." "There's nothing to tell," Sarah lied, sitting down and serving herself coffee with slightly trembling hands. "Of course there is. You disappeared all night, come back with this air of someone who discovered the world, and still say there's nothing to tell." Rachel leaned over the table, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Was he good?" "Jessica!" Sarah felt her face catch fire. "What? You're an adult woman, Sarah. And by the way, you're radiant today. It was exactly what you needed." Sarah wanted to tell, wanted to share with someone the magnitude of what had happened, but words seemed insufficient. How to explain that in a single night she had discovered parts of herself she didn't even know existed? How to describe the sensation of being touched by someone who seemed to understand her body better than she herself? It was intense, she finally admitted, and the other women cheered as if she had just announced an Olympic victory. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of preparations for departure. Sarah packed mechanically, part of her mind still in the top-floor suite, reliving every moment with Michael. She looked for him discreetly around the resort, but the concierge informed her that the guest from the presidential suite had checked out before dawn. The trip back to Hope Springs was torturous. While Jessica and the others chatted animatedly about the weekend's events, Sarah remained silent, watching the landscape through the window and wondering if it had all been just a dream too vivid. The only real proof of what had happened was the sensitivity of her body and the note she kept folded in her wallet. Arriving home on Sunday afternoon, she found her father reading the Bible on the porch, as he always did after Sunday service. Pastor Robert looked up when she approached, and Sarah had the absolute certainty that he could read on her face everything that had happened. "How was the weekend, daughter?" "Peaceful, Dad. We rested, talked. It was good to get out of the routine a bit." "That's good. You needed it. Sometimes we forget that you're also young and need moments of leisure." He smiled, and Sarah felt even worse for lying. "Tomorrow. There's the school council meeting. Some important papers arrived during your absence." "What kind of papers?" "Related to the new investments they mentioned at the last meeting. It seems they finally found an investor interested in modernizing the school's structure." Sarah nodded, but her mind was far from the school's administrative matters. She went up to her simple single bed, so different from the luxurious bed, where she had discovered pleasures she had never imagined possible. She closed her eyes and tried to feel Michael's hands on her skin again, but the memory already seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The following 2 weeks were a constant struggle between the woman she had always been and the one she discovered she was. During classes, she found herself lost in daydreams, remembering the timbre of Michael's voice when he whispered her name, the way his eyes darkened when he desired her. Her students noticed the change. She was more distracted, more sensitive, more human in some way. "Miss Mitchell, are you okay?" Amber asked after a class on American romanticism, where Sarah had lost herself talking about passion with unusual intensity. "I am, Amber. Why?" "You seem different, more... I don't know how to explain it, as if you discovered something important." The teenager's perception made her uncomfortable. If a 17-year-old student could notice the transformation, what else was transparent? In her behavior. It was on Monday of the 3rd week after the resort that her life took a completely unexpected direction. Sarah arrived at school to find an unusual movement in the office. Staff were talking in groups, and there was an atmosphere of expectation in the air. "What's happening?" she asked Mrs. Wallace, the school's oldest secretary. "The new investor has arrived, Ms. Mitchell. He's in a meeting with the board right now. They say he's going to change a lot around here." Sarah headed to the teacher's lounge, where she found her colleagues commenting animatedly about the possible changes. Jessica was especially excited. "Finally, we're going to have resources to improve the labs, the library, maybe even increase our salaries," she was saying. "It seems the guy is very rich, owns several technology companies." "Do you know his name?" Rachel asked. "Michael something. Harrison, I think. Foreign-sounding name." Sarah felt the world stop around her. The name echoed in her mind like a gunshot, and she had to lean on the table to keep from staggering. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be him. "Sarah, you're pale. What's wrong?" Jessica approached, concerned. I need air. Excuse me." Sarah left the room almost running, heading to the school courtyard. Her mind was working frantically, trying to process the possibility that Michael, the man who had transformed her life in a single night, was there, at the school where she worked, as an investor. That's when she heard his voice coming from the boardroom. The tone was more formal, professional, but it was unmistakably the same voice that had whispered words of desire in her ear. Sarah hid behind a column, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. The boardroom door opened and she saw him. Michael Harrison, wearing an impeccable dark suit, perfectly combed hair, a posture of authority she hadn't seen at the resort. He was accompanied by the principal, Mrs. Linda, and by the president of the administrative board, Dr. Thomas. "Mr. Harrison, I'm sure our partnership will be very productive," the principal was saying. "St. Francis Academy has a tradition of academic excellence, and with your investments, we can reach even higher levels." I'm eager to get to know the teaching staff better, Michael replied, and Sarah felt a shiver at hearing his voice. I believe that the success of any institution lies in the quality of its teachers. It was at that moment that he saw her. Michael's eyes found hers across the courtyard, and the expression of professionalism on his face gave way to something more intense, more personal. For an instant, time seemed to freeze, and Sarah had the feeling that she was being analyzed, evaluated, recognized. He quickly looked away, resuming the conversation with the principal, but Sarah had seen enough. There was recognition in that look, and also something that seemed like planning, as if her presence there wasn't a surprise to him. The rest of the day passed in a fog of anxiety and speculation. Sarah barely managed to concentrate on her classes, and when she finally arrived home, she was emotionally exhausted. She said nothing to her father about the new investor, but spent the entire night awake, trying to understand what was happening. The next day, the answer began to clarify. Michael was formally introduced to the faculty during an extraordinary meeting. Sarah sat at the back of the auditorium, trying to become invisible, but she felt his eyes searching for her in the crowd. Mr. Harrison has acquired a majority stake in our institution through his investment holding, explained the principal. He will be the new president of the Educational Council and will work with us to implement structural and pedagogical improvements. Michael stood up to speak, and his presence completely dominated the auditorium. I appreciate the trust placed in me. I believe deeply in the transformative power of education, and I hope to contribute to St. Francis Academy, continuing to be a reference in academic and human formation. When the meeting ended, Sarah tried to leave quickly, but Michael intercepted her in the hallway. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it? He extended his hand, maintaining a professional tone, but Sarah could see the intensity in his eyes. Michael Harrison, I've heard very good things about your work in literature. Mr. Harrison, she replied, shaking his hand and feeling the same electricity as always. Welcome to the Academy. I'd like to talk with you about some ideas for the literature department. Would you have time for a private meeting this week? The word private carried a weight that only the two of them could understand. Sarah looked around and saw several colleagues observing the interaction with curiosity. Of course, whenever it's convenient. How about tomorrow, after school hours, in the president's office? All right. When Michael walked away, Jessica appeared beside Sarah with a mischievous smile. Wow, he is handsome, and he seems to have liked you. How lucky, huh? It's just work, Jessica. Of course it is, Jessica laughed. Very interesting work, apparently. Sarah spent the rest of the day and the entire night mentally preparing for the meeting. What kind of conversation did Michael want to have? Was it really about work, or was there something more? And more importantly, how should she behave? As the professional teacher she had always been, or as the woman he had met at the resort? The following afternoon, Sarah headed to the president's office with her heart racing. The office had been quickly renovated, with new furniture and state-of-the-art equipment. Michael was standing in front of a large window observing the school courtyard. You can come in and close the door. Please, he said without turning around. Sarah obeyed, and when the door closed, the environment completely changed. The formality of the previous day gave way to a palpable sexual tension. 3 weeks, Michael turned to face her. 3 weeks. Since that night, and you didn't try to find me. You disappeared in the morning. How could I find you? You didn't even ask my last name at the resort. You didn't even try to find out who I was. Maybe because I didn't want that night to be more than what it was. Michael approached her slowly, like a predator who knew exactly what he wanted. And what was it, Sarah? Her name on his lips still had the same devastating effect. Sarah felt her legs go weak, but tried to maintain her composure. It was a mistake. Was it? He stopped a few inches from her, so close that she could smell his perfume, the same one that was impregnated in the sheets of the suite. Then why are you trembling? It was true, Sarah was trembling, but not from fear. It was the same tremor that had dominated her the first time he touched her, a mixture of desire and anticipation that her body seemed unable to control. Why are you here, Michael? Why did you buy this school? Do you really want to know? Yes. Michael took a step back, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. Because I couldn't get you out of my head. Because I spent 3 weeks thinking about the taste of your skin, the sound of your voice when you moaned my name, the way you gave yourself completely that night. Sarah felt her face catch fire, but she couldn't look away. Because, he continued, I wanted to understand who was the woman behind the exemplary teacher, and the only way to do that was to come to your world. You bought an entire school just to see me. I bought a school because it's a good investment, but I chose this. School because you work here. Michael's brutal honesty left Sarah speechless. No one had ever done anything remotely similar for her. No one had ever shown such an intense interest in knowing her. Michael, what happened at the resort can't be repeated. Not here. You don't understand what it's like to live in this town. The expectations that fall on me. Then explain it to me. I am a pastor's daughter, a teacher at a Christian school. My reputation is all I have. If someone suspects that between us there is something beyond work. What are you feeling right now, Sarah? The question caught her off guard. What? Right now, being here with me, what are you feeling? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to find an answer that wouldn't condemn her. But when she opened them again, Michael was so close that she could see the small lines around his eyes, the intensity that burned in his gaze. Desire, she whispered, fear, confusion, all at the same time. And if I told you I feel the same thing? Before she could answer, Michael kissed her. It wasn't the hesitant kiss of the first night at the resort. It was a kiss loaded with 3 weeks of longing, of frustration, of repressed desire. Sarah tried to resist for a fraction of a second, remembering where they were, but her body betrayed her mind, responding with the same intensity. When they separated, they were both breathless. Michael rested his forehead against hers, and Sarah could feel his hands trembling slightly as they caressed her face. We can't do this here, she whispered. I know, but I can't stay away from you, Sarah. I tried. I spent these 3 weeks trying to forget, trying to focus on work, on other things. But you're here. He touched her chest, over her heart. And here, he touched his own head. And I don't know how to live without this anymore. Michael. A loud knock on the door interrupted them abruptly. Sarah moved away from him quickly, smoothing her blouse and trying to recompose her appearance, while Michael headed to his desk. Come in, he said, his voice slightly hoarse. The secretary appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Harrison, but some urgent documents have arrived that need your signature. Of course. Ms. Mitchell, can we continue our conversation tomorrow? Yes, of course, Sarah replied, avoiding looking at him directly. Excuse me. She left the room with her legs still weak, aware that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Michael was there at the school in her life, and as much as she tried to deny it, she didn't want him to leave. But in the following days, the situation became drastically complicated. Rumors began to circulate among the school staff about the private meeting between the new president and the literature teacher. Whispered comments in the corridors, speculative looks, knowing smiles that made Sarah feel exposed and judged. The situation worsened when Mrs. Wallace, the old secretary, made a comment during the break. It's interesting how Mr. Harrison seems to have so much interest in the literature department. He's already scheduled 3 private meetings with Ms. Mitchell this week. Jessica defended her friend immediately. And what's the problem? Sarah is the best literature teacher we've ever had. It's natural that he wants her opinions. But Rachel, always more skeptical, murmured, Sure, I just hope it's only professional opinion he's looking for. Sarah felt the weight of the looks and comments, but she couldn't stay away from Michael. The meetings were a sweet torture. They discussed educational projects, curriculum improvements, but the sexual tension was palpable. Small, accidental, brushes, looks that lasted longer than necessary, conversations that drifted to personal subjects. It was at the 5th meeting that things completely spiraled out of control. Michael had asked her to stay after school hours to discuss the implementation of a reading incentive project. When Sarah arrived at the office, she found the lights dimmed, a bottle of wine on the table, and Michael with an expression that left no doubt about his intentions. "This is not a work meeting," she said, stopping at the door. "No, it's not." Michael approached her slowly. "I'm tired of pretending I can concentrate on spreadsheets and pedagogical projects when you're in the same room with me." "Michael, we've already talked about this. Not here." "Then where, Sarah? When? How long? Do you want me to wait?" "I don't know. I don't know how to solve this." "Solve it by being with me." The simplicity of the answer left her speechless. Being with him, as if it were that easy, as if she could simply ignore a lifetime of conditioning, of expectations, of fear of others, judgment. "You don't understand how things are here," she tried to explain. "This town is small, everyone knows everyone. If someone finds out..." "And if they find out what? That you're an adult woman capable of making your own decisions? That I'm a woman who got involved with a married man?" Michael stopped in the middle of his movement toward her. "What did you say?" "You're married, Michael. I saw it in the newspaper before you showed up here. The scandal, the married politician. Your wife..." "Sarah, I've been divorced for 2 years." "What? Divorced?" "The woman from the scandal is not my wife. She's my ex-wife, and the whole scandal was a set-up by her to harm me professionally." Sarah felt the ground move beneath her feet. "But the newspaper said..." "The newspaper said what she wanted it to say. I'm being blackmailed, Sarah, by her and the politicians she got involved with. That's why I came here, to get away from Chicago while my lawyers resolved the situation. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I wanted to protect you, because the less you knew about my problems, the safer you would be." Michael approached her again, and this time Sarah didn't step back. "But now you're here," she whispered. "And I don't know what to do with that. Do what your heart is telling you to do." When Michael kissed her this time, Sarah gave herself completely. All the formal meetings, all the repressed tension, all the nights awake thinking about him exploded in a desperate kiss, loaded with promises and dangers. But it was exactly at that moment that the door opened, and Principal Linda entered the room, stopping immediately upon seeing the scene. "I apologize," she said, but there was an icy tone in her voice. "I didn't know there was a meeting in progress." Sarah moved away from Michael, as if she had received an electric shock, her face red with shame and panic. Michael, in turn, maintained his composure, but there was tension in his posture. "Principal Linda, we were just..." "I know exactly what you were doing, Mr. Harrison." The principal closed the door behind her. "And I must say I am deeply disappointed, especially with you, Sarah." "Principal Linda, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. What I saw is unacceptable in our institution. Sarah, you represent Christian values to our students. How can you compromise your reputation and that of the school in this way?" Michael stepped forward. "Principal Linda, the responsibility is entirely mine. I was the one who insisted..." "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, you are our investor, but that doesn't give you the right to seduce our employees." The words hit Sarah like slaps. Seduce, as if she were a helpless victim, incapable of making her own decisions. "That's not how it happened," she said, finding her voice. There are feelings involved." "Feelings?" The principal laughed, but it was a cold laugh. "Sarah, you are a pastor's daughter. You grew up in this community. How can you throw all that away because of a man you barely know?" The humiliation burned in Sarah's chest like acid. Each word from the principal was a confirmation of her worst fears about how she would be judged if someone found out. "Principal Linda," Michael tried again, "I can assure you that my intentions regarding Ms. Mitchell are completely serious." "Your intentions don't matter now, Mr. Harrison. What matters is that the reputation of this school has been compromised." The principal addressed Sarah directly. "I'm going to convene an extraordinary meeting of the board for tomorrow. Until then, I suggest you think carefully about your priorities." After the principal left, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah felt small, exposed, humiliated in a way that cut deeper than any physical pain. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to go through this. You don't understand, she whispered, tears finally beginning to fall. She's going to tell everyone, the board, the parents of the students, my father. We'll figure it out. I can talk to her, explain. Explain what, Michael? That you came here looking for me, that you bought the school to keep me close? Do you think that will improve the situation? Michael was silent, because they both knew she was right. The truth, however romantic it might seem, would only make things worse from the perspective of the conservative community where Sarah lived. I'm leaving, she said, picking up her purse. I need to think. Sarah, don't run away from me, not again. She stopped at the door without turning to look at him. I'm not running away from you, Michael. I'm running away from what being with you is going to cost me. When she arrived home that night, Sarah found her father waiting for her in the living room with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of disappointment, concern, and something that seemed like fear. Sarah, we need to talk. She immediately knew that the news had already spread. In small towns, scandals traveled faster than light. Dad, I can explain. Mrs. Linda called me an hour ago. Pastor Robert's voice was more tired than angry. She told me what she saw today at school. Sarah sat on the sofa, feeling like a teenager being confronted after a mischief. But she wasn't a teenager. She was an adult woman, and she was tired of feeling guilty for having feelings. Dad, I know how this must seem. How it seems, daughter, is that you completely forgot the values that your mother and I tried to teach. How it seems is that you're throwing away your reputation, our reputation, because of a man who just arrived in town. It's not that simple. Then, explain to me how it is. Sarah looked at her father, at the man who had dedicated his entire life to serving God and the community, who had raised his daughter alone after his wife's death, who had sacrificed so much to give her an education, a respected position in society. How to explain that she had discovered a part of herself that he could not even imagine existed? I fell in love, Dad. The words came out simpler than she expected, but they carried a weight that made Pastor Robert sit heavily in the armchair, in D. Love. He repeated the word as if it were foreign. With a man you barely know. With a man who makes me feel alive for the first time in my life. And what do you know about this man, Sarah? About his family, his values, his intentions? I know that he respects me, that he sees me as a woman, not just as a symbol of virtue that must be preserved. Pastor Robert made an expression of pain, as if his daughter's words were physical blows. Is that how you see us? As people who want to imprison you? No, Dad, but you want to protect me from things that maybe I don't need protection from. They were silent for long minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Pastor Robert sighed deeply. Sarah, you are my daughter. I love you more than my own life, but I cannot approve of what's happening. I cannot pretend that everything is okay when you're destroying everything you've worked for over the years. And if I say I don't care, that being with him is worth any sacrifice, then I would say you're no longer the daughter I raised. The words cut deep, and Sarah felt as if a part of herself was dying. She went up to her room without saying anything else, aware that she had reached a point of no return. That night, lying on the bed where she had spent her entire life dreaming of freedom, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Michael. We need to talk. Tomorrow, after the board meeting, I'll have an answer for you. The response came minutes later. Whatever your decision is, I will respect it. But know that you changed my life too. Sarah put away the phone and stared at the ceiling until dawn, knowing that in the next few hours she would define not only her future, but also who she really wanted to be. The next morning dawned gray, over Hope Springs, as if the sky reflected the weight that Sarah carried in her chest. She had slept only 2 hours, spending the rest of the night rehearsing the words she would say at the board meeting, trying to find a way to preserve her dignity amid the scandal that was approaching like an inevitable storm. When she went down for breakfast, she found her father already dressed in his best suit, preparing to accompany her to school. Pastor Robert avoided her gaze during the entire silent meal. but Sarah could feel the disappointment emanating from him like heat from a furnace. When they finally got up to leave, he stopped at the door and turned to her. "Daughter, there's still time to reconsider. If you admit that you made a mistake, if you show sincere repentance, maybe we can work around this situation." Sarah looked at the man who had been her hero throughout her life, who had sacrificed so much to raise her alone after her mother's death, who had dedicated each day to being an example of moral rectitude for the community. Part of her wanted to give in, wanted to go back to being the obedient daughter who never caused problems, who never questioned, who never challenged others' expectations. "Dad, I can't pretend that I regret having found love." "Love?" The word came out of his mouth as if it were bitter. "Daughter, you've known this man for a few weeks. How can you call this love?" "Because it's what I feel in my chest when I'm with him. Because for the first time in my life someone sees me as a woman before seeing me as a pastor's daughter or exemplary teacher." Pastor Robert closed his eyes as if his daughter's words were a prayer he didn't want to hear. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. "Then may God help us, because I don't know how to do this anymore." The way to school was traversed in absolute silence. When they arrived, Sarah immediately noticed that something had changed. The staff who normally greeted her with warm smiles now looked away or offered timid nods. Conversation ceased when she passed, only to resume in whispers as soon as she moved away. Jessica was waiting at the entrance to the teacher's lounge, her face contorted with worry. "Sarah, I need to tell you something before the meeting." She pulled her friend to a more secluded corner. "Some parents came here early this morning, questioning if their children are safe with you teaching. And there's more." "What else?" "Someone leaked information about you and Michael to that town journalist, Mario Santos. He's asking questions, trying to put together a story about inappropriate conduct in religious institutions." Sarah felt her stomach turn. Mario Santos was known for his sensationalist language and for transforming small local scandals into big public dramas. If he got his hands on the story, it would be the end of any chance of her getting out of this situation with a minimum of dignity preserved. Who could have told him? "I don't know, but someone who knows details. He knew about the private meetings, about the time you spent together." Before Sarah could respond, the bell rang, indicating that the extraordinary board meeting was about to begin. Her heart raced, and she headed to the main auditorium with shaky legs, aware that her professional and personal future would be defined in the next few minutes. The auditorium was fuller than usual. In addition to the members of the administrative board, there were parents of students, school staff, and some community members. All eyes turned to Sarah when she entered, and she felt like a defendant being led to trial. Michael was already present, seated at the main table with an impenetrable expression. When their eyes met across the auditorium, he made a small movement with his head, not exactly a nod, but a silent acknowledgement. They would face this together. Principal Linda called the meeting to order, and with a grave expression began to expose the facts she had witnessed the day before. Her narrative was clinical, precise, but loaded with an undertone of disapproval that made Sarah shrink in her chair. "Given what I witnessed yesterday afternoon, I am obliged to question whether Ms. Sarah Mitchell still possesses the moral qualifications necessary to exercise her position in our institution." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Sarah saw her father stand up in the audience, his face pale. "Principal Linda, with all due respect, I think it's precipitous to make judgments based on—" "Pastor Robert," the principal interrupted him, "I understand that this situation is embarrassing for you, but we cannot ignore what happened. This is a Christian institution, and our teachers must be examples of moral conduct for our students." It was then that Michael stood up. His presence immediately dominated the environment, and when he began to speak, his voice echoed through the auditorium with an authority that silenced all murmurs. "Principal Linda, board members, I would like to clarify some points about this situation." He paused, his gaze moving across the auditorium before fixing on Sarah. "First of all, any responsibility for what happened is entirely mine. I was the one who sought the approach with Ms. Mitchell. I was the one who insisted on the private meetings. Mr. Harrison, the principal tried to interrupt him, but Michael raised his hand. Please let me finish. Secondly, I want everyone to know that my intentions regarding Ms. Mitchell are completely serious. This is not a whim or inappropriate behavior on my part. This is about a man who fell in love with an extraordinary woman and who intends to honor that feeling in the most respectful way possible. The auditorium was in absolute silence. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, not from shame but from a deep gratitude for having someone willing to publicly defend what they felt for each other. Thirdly, Michael continued, I would like to inform that I will be stepping away from my duties as President of the Educational Council, effective immediately. My investments in the school will continue, but under third-party management, so that there is no conflict of interest. Mr. Harrison, that's not necessary, began the board treasurer. Yes, it is, Dr. Thomas. It's the only way to ensure that the reputation of the school and Ms. Mitchell are preserved. Michael turned to Sarah again, and this time he didn't try to hide the intensity of what he felt. Sarah, you don't need to choose between your career and your feelings. I make this choice for both of us. Michael's attitude left everyone in the auditorium even more confused. They expected a scandal, a desperate defense, perhaps even denials. They didn't expect a public declaration of love, followed by a professional sacrifice. Principal Linda, clearly disconcerted by the turn of events, tried to regain control of the situation. Well, that certainly changes some things, but we still need to discuss Ms. Mitchell's situation. It was then that a voice rose from the back of the auditorium. May I speak? Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Amber, the senior student who always actively participated in literature classes. She stood up, despite protests from some adults about students not having a voice in the meeting. Please, the girl insisted, let me speak about the teacher you're judging. The principal hesitated, but eventually agreed. Be brief, Amber. Ms. Mitchell changed my life, the teenager began, her voice clear and firm. Not only did she teach me about literature, but she taught me to question, to think, to not accept things just because someone said I should accept them. She taught me that women can be strong, independent, that they can make choices. Other students began to stand up, echoing Amber's sentiments. Jason, the shy boy who rarely spoke, was next. The teacher teaches us about Hawthorne's characters, about how they struggle between what they feel and what society expects of them. Maybe she's just living what she teaches us. That being human means having conflicts, making difficult choices. She taught us that true love is worth fighting for, said Mary, a student who had always been shy, even when the whole world is against you. Sarah was crying openly now, deeply touched by the spontaneous defense of her students, but she knew that, however moving it was, it wouldn't change the minds of the adults who controlled her professional destiny. The principal, visibly irritated by the student's interruption, banged the gavel on the table. Silence, this is an administrative meeting, not a student opinion forum. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, do you have anything to say in your defense? Sarah rose slowly, feeling the weight of all eyes upon her. Throughout her life she had avoided being the center of attention, had preferred the safety of anonymity, but now, facing the most challenging moment of her existence, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, members of the community, she began, her voice trembling at first, but gaining firmness as she spoke. You've known me for years. You know of my dedication to this school, of the love I have for my students, of the respect I've always shown for this institution. That makes your current behavior even more disappointing, interrupted one of the board members. My behavior, Sarah repeated, and there was something new in her voice, an authority she had never demonstrated before. You want to know about my behavior? I'll tell you. For 28 years, my behavior was impeccable. I followed all the rules, met all expectations, never questioned, never challenged, never put my own desires above what was expected of me. She paused, her gaze moving across the auditorium. And you know what that brought me? An empty life, an existence where I was more a symbol than a person. where my value was not in what I was, but in what I represented for others. Sarah, her father tried to intervene, but she continued, Dad, I love you. I love you more than my own life, and I know you did everything you could to raise me in the best way. But there comes a time when a woman needs to decide who she wants to be, not who others want her to be. The intensity of her words created an absolute silence in the auditorium. Michael was watching her with an expression of admiration and pride. That made her heart race. Yes, I fell in love. Yes, I allowed my feelings to influence my professional behavior. And you know what? I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I feel alive. For the first time, I'm making choices based on what I want, not on what you expect of me. And your responsibilities? Asked the principal. Your commitments to this institution? My responsibilities have always been to teach my students to think critically, to question, to seek the truth. How can I do that if I myself don't have the courage to live authentically? One of the parents stood up. Ms. Mitchell, that's all very beautiful, but your students need examples of morality, not impulsivity. Morality, Sarah repeated the word as if she were tasting it. You want to talk about morality? Let me tell you a story. She went to the center of the auditorium, as she did when she was giving one of her most important lessons. A few months ago, one of my students came to talk to me. She was being pressured by her family to accept an arranged marriage with a much older man, someone she didn't love, but who would be financially advantageous for the family. Do you know what I told her? Sarah looked directly at her father. I told her that she should obey her family, that love wasn't the most important thing, that security and social approval should come first. I said that because it was what I believed, what I had been taught, had to believe. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. 3 days later, that girl tried to kill herself because she couldn't live a life that wasn't hers, married to a man she didn't love, being someone she wasn't. A shocked murmur ran through the auditorium. It was at that moment that I began to question everything I believed about love, about duty, about what really matters in life. And when I met Michael, when I felt for the first time what it is to truly love someone, I understood that I had spent my entire life giving advice about a life that I myself had never lived. The principal was visibly uncomfortable. Ms. Mitchell, this specific situation is very different. Is it different because this time I chose to follow my heart instead of following what you expected of me? Michael stood up again. May I interrupt for a moment? All eyes turned to him. There's something I need to tell you, something about why I really came to Hope Springs. Sarah looked at him confused. Michael hadn't mentioned anything about other reasons for being there. I didn't come just for investments or to escape problems in Chicago. I came because my sister disappeared 5 years ago, and the last clue we have about her leads to this town. The entire auditorium fell into absolute silence. Emily Harrison, maybe some of you remember her. She spent a few months here in 2019, attended the local church. She was a young woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, said she was doing research work on religious communities. Pastor Robert stood up abruptly, his face as pale as paper. You are Emily's brother. You knew her. She attended our church for some time, said she was writing a book about faith in small communities. Michael nodded. She was investigating something, but never told me exactly what, just that she had discovered something important, here in Hope Springs, something that could, her words were, change the lives of many people. And then she disappeared, asked the principal. Simply vanished. Stopped answering phones, her credit cards were never used again, no one heard from her. The police investigated but found nothing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the way Michael talked about his sister that suggested he suspected something more sinister than a simple voluntary disappearance. Why are you telling this now? Asked one of the board members. Because I want everyone to understand that I didn't come here on a whim. I came because this town holds secrets that I need to discover. And if in the process I fell in love with Sarah, if I found someone who makes my life have meaning again, then maybe there's a bigger reason for me to be here. Pastor Robert remained standing, but now seemed to be struggling with memories he preferred to keep buried. Pastor, Michael addressed him directly, do you remember anything else about my sister? Any detail can be important. She asked many questions about the history of the church, about old school boards, about families who had suddenly left town. What kind of families? I don't specifically remember, but Pastor Robert hesitated, looking around the auditorium as if calculating how much he should reveal. There were rumors at the time, things I preferred not to believe. What kind of rumors? It was Principal Linda who answered, and her voice was tense. I think this conversation is straying from the focus of the meeting. We are here to discuss Ms. Mitchell's situation, not to revive old gossip. But Michael was not intimidated. Principal Linda, with all due respect, if my sister discovered something that put her in danger, I need to know what it was. And if this has anything to do with this school or this community, then you also need to know. The tension in the auditorium was palpable. Sarah realized that there were underground currents of information circulating among the adults present, things that she, despite having lived there her entire life, had never noticed. Michael, she said softly, do you think what happened to your sister has anything to do with you finding me? I don't know, but I don't believe in coincidences. Emily was investigating something in this town. She disappeared. 5 years later, I come here following her clues and fall in love with the daughter of a pastor who knew her. Pastor Robert sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. There are things about the past of this community that perhaps it's better to leave buried. Dad, Sarah approached him. What things? Not now, daughter. Not here. The principal banged the gavel again, clearly trying to regain control of the situation that had completely derailed. This meeting is dangerously deviating from its purpose. Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry about your sister's situation, but we cannot turn an administrative meeting into a police investigation. Then schedule another meeting, Michael replied. Because I'm not going to stop looking for answers. And if anyone in this room knows anything about what happened to Emily, I'm going to find out. At that moment, one of the oldest board members, Dr. Arthur Wilson, stood up with difficulty. He was a man of more than 70 years, respected in the community for decades. Michael, he said, and there was weariness in his voice. Your sister asked questions about the old school board, about things that happened a long time ago, when some of us were still young. What kind of things? Dr. Arthur looked around the auditorium, and Sarah saw fear in his eyes. Things that a Christian community should have denounced a long time ago, but chose to bury to protect its reputation. The silence that followed was so dense, it seemed to have physical substance. Abuse, he finally said, and the word echoed through the auditorium like a gunshot. Child abuse, by people in positions of authority, people who used the community's trust to do terrible things. Several people in the auditorium gasped, and Sarah felt the world spin around her. That was a long time ago, the principal said quickly. The people involved have already died or moved away. There's nothing more. Yes, there is, Dr. Arthur interrupted her. There are the victims who still live with the consequences. There are the families who were silenced. There is the truth that was never told. Michael was visibly shaken. My sister discovered this? Your sister had a list of names, victims, perpetrators, people who knew but did nothing. She wanted to make everything public. And then she disappeared. Dr. Arthur nodded gravely. Many people had a lot to lose if this story came to light. Reputations, fortunes, positions of power. Your sister was messing with a very dangerous hornet's nest. Sarah felt as if she were watching her entire life crumble. The community where she grew up, the school where she worked, the church where she was raised, everything was built on dark secrets she had never imagined. Dad, she turned to Pastor Robert, did you know about this? Her father looked at her with eyes full of tears. I suspected. There were signs, things I should have investigated more. But I was young and inexperienced, and when I tried to raise questions, I was discouraged. Discouraged by whom? By people who had the power to end my career, destroy our family. Michael approached Sarah and, for the first time since the meeting began, touched her hand publicly. Now do you understand why it's so important that we be honest about what we feel for each other? Why we can't live our lives based on the fear of what others will think? Sarah looked at him, then at her father, then at the auditorium full of people who suddenly seemed like strangers. What you're saying is that my sister may have been killed to silence her, Michael asked. We don't know, Dr. Arthur answered, but she was asking dangerous questions and then she simply disappeared. The principal tried one last time to regain control. This is all very serious, but it has no relation to Ms. Mitchell's current situation. Yes, it does, Sarah said, and her voice was stronger than ever. It has everything to do with it. You're judging me for having followed my heart, for having fallen in love, for having made choices based on what I feel. But this same community covered up terrible crimes to preserve its appearances. She turned to face the entire auditorium. You want to talk about morality. Where was the morality when children were abused and everyone remained silent? Where was the morality when a woman who was seeking justice simply disappeared? Sarah, her father tried to intervene. No, Dad. Enough. Enough of living in fear. Enough of hiding the truth to protect reputations. She turned to Michael, and when their eyes met, it was as if an electric current passed between them. Michael, I don't know what happened to your sister, but I know that if she was fighting for the truth, then she was on the right side. And I want to be on the right side too. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll help you find out what happened to Emily. I'm saying I'm not going to live my life anymore, in fear of the judgment of people who have much worse skeletons in the closet. Sarah's declaration caused a commotion in the auditorium. Several people began to speak at the same time, some defending her, others protesting against her words. The principal banged the gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! But Sarah wasn't finished. And I'm saying one more thing. If you think I'm not suitable to teach at this school because I fell in love with a good and honest man, then I accept my dismissal. But I don't accept being judged by people who prefer to hide the truth rather than face it. Michael moved closer to her. Sarah, you don't need to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for myself. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something because it's what I believe is right. Pastor Robert stood up again, and when he spoke, his voice was broken with emotion. Daughter, you're right. I failed to protect the children of this community when I was younger. I failed to seek the truth when I should have been braver. I won't fail to support you now when you're being brave. He turned to the auditorium. My daughter is the most upright woman I know. If she chose this man, if she believes it's worth fighting for this love, then I support her decision. Tears were flowing freely down Sarah's face. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free, free to love, free to choose, free to seek the truth regardless of the consequences. The principal, seeing that she had completely lost control of the situation, made a final attempt to safeguard the school's authority. Very well. Given everything that has been said here today, and considering Ms. Mitchell's position, I inform that she is relieved of her duties, effective immediately. I accept, Sarah responded without hesitation. Michael took her hand and squeezed it. We'll discover the truth about Emily. Together. Yes, she replied, looking directly into his eyes. Together. But as they left the auditorium hand in hand, followed by Pastor Robert and the gazes of the entire community, Sarah could not imagine that the truth they were about to discover would change not only their lives, but would reveal connections between the past and the present that she could not have imagined even in her worst nightmares. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the grey clouds, but the storm that was approaching would be much more intense than any meteorological phenomenon that Hope Springs had ever faced. 3 days after the meeting that changed their lives forever, Sarah found herself on her father's porch, watching Michael unload boxes of documents from the trunk of his car. The transformation in her life had been so rapid and radical that sometimes she needed to pinch herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. In 72 hours, she had lost her job, challenged an entire community, publicly declared her love, and become a partner in an investigation that could be dangerous, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely alive. "These are all the files I could gather about Emily," Michael explained, climbing the porch steps with a heavy box in his arms. "Correspondence, notes, photographs, even recordings of some conversations she had with me by phone in the last weeks before she disappeared." Pastor Robert appeared at the door, carrying a tray with coffee and cookies. In the last few days, he had transformed into his daughter's most unlikely ally, supporting her decision to investigate the dark past of the community he had served for decades. "Let me help with that," he said, indicating a spot on the porch table where they could organize the documents. Sarah observed her father with a mixture of love and admiration. The revelation about the abuse covered up by the community had deeply shaken his convictions, but had also awakened in him a courage she had never seen before. For the first time, Pastor Robert seemed willing to face uncomfortable truths, even if it meant questioning everything he believed in. "Where do we start?" she asked, opening the first box. "With the last notes that Emily made," Michael answered, taking out a black-covered notebook. She had a habit of noting everything. Conversations, impressions, theories. This one is from the period when she was here in Hope Springs. Sarah took the notebook and began to leaf through it. Emily's handwriting was small and precise, almost meticulous. The first pages contained general observations about the town, descriptions of the people she had met, impressions about the social dynamics of the community. But as she progressed, the notes became more specific, more worrying. "Listen to this," Sarah said, reading aloud. "Today I talked with Mary Sanders, former school employee. She mentioned rumors about an inner circle in the old board, men who met regularly and who had privileged access to the children. When I tried to get more details, she became visibly nervous and changed the subject." Michael leaned in closer, and Sarah felt that familiar electricity when their bodies drew near. Even amid the gravity of the situation, the attraction between them remained intense, palpable. "Keep reading," he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Pastor John Miller, predecessor of Pastor Robert, seems to have been a central figure. Several people mentioned his name when I asked about changes in church leadership, but always with an evasive tone. I discovered that he left town suddenly in 1995, right after some families also moved unexpectedly. Pastor Robert paled at hearing the name of his predecessor. "John Miller. He was the one who trained me when I arrived here. I always thought it strange how he simply disappeared one night, leaving only a letter saying that God had called him to a mission elsewhere." "When did you arrive here, Dad?" "In 1996. The church had been without a pastor for months. The community was fragmented. There was a strange atmosphere, as if everyone were keeping secrets they were afraid to reveal." Sarah continued reading Emily's notes, and with each page the picture became darker. There were references to compromising photographs, to a blackmail system that involved prominent families in the town, to children who had been sent to study in other cities but who never gave news again. "Here," she stopped at a specific page, "Emily writes about a meeting with someone who identifies themselves only as A. This person claims to have physical evidence of the abuse, but is afraid to expose themselves." Just that," Michael frowned. "It seems they scheduled a meeting for a week after this note. It's the last entry in the notebook." Michael took another document from the box. "This is the last voicemail she left me, 3 days before she disappeared." He activated his cell phone and Emily's voice filled the porch. It was a female voice, young but loaded with tension. "Mike, I'm close to discovering something big, very big. There are powerful people involved, people who still live here and who have a lot to lose if the truth comes out. I found someone, willing to testify, someone who has evidence. I'm going to meet this person tomorrow night. If anything happens to me, there's a place where I kept copies of everything I discovered. Remember our childhood game, The Hidden Treasure? It's there. Love you, bro." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Michael was visibly emotional, his hands trembling slightly as he put away the phone. "You played Hidden Treasure?" Sarah asked softly. "When we were children, we had a summer house in the mountains. Emily and I invented a game where we hid treasures in secret places and left clues for each other. There was a specific location that only the two of us knew. About where? About 2 hours from here, on a property that our family owned for decades. It was sold a few years ago, but maybe..." Pastor Robert suddenly stood up. You can't go there alone. If Emily was right about dangerous people being involved, you might be putting yourselves at risk. Dad, we can't simply ignore this clue. If Emily left evidence there, then let's all go together, the pastor decided. And let's tell someone where we're going in case something happens. But before they could plan the trip, a loud knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Through the window, Sarah saw two men in suits on the front porch. One of them she recognized as an investigator from the police department. Good morning, the investigator said when Pastor Robert opened the door. Detective Johnson. Police. Department, we'd like to speak with Mr. Michael Harrison. Michael stepped forward. That's me, how can I help you? Mr. Harrison, we've received some anonymous complaints about your activities here in town, specifically about conducting unauthorized investigations related to a missing person case. I'm looking for my sister, who disappeared 5 years ago. I didn't know that was a crime. It's not a crime, sir, but making public accusations without evidence, disturbing the peace of a community, that can be considered slander and defamation. Sarah felt a wave of indignation. Detective Johnson, what accusations? We're just trying to discover the truth about what happened to Emily Harrison. Miss, the detective consulted a notepad. Mitchell, isn't it? We've also received complaints about your conduct at the school where you worked. It seems that you two have been causing quite a stir around here. Who made these complaints? Michael asked, but his voice was controlledly calm. I can't reveal the identity of the complainants, but I can say they are respectable people in the community, concerned with public order. Pastor Robert stepped forward. Detective, with all due respect, my daughter and Mr. Harrison have done nothing illegal. They are exercising their rights as citizens to seek information about a case that was never properly investigated. Pastor Robert, I understand your position, but I must warn you about the risks of making unfounded accusations, especially accusations that involve deceased people who cannot defend themselves. The implicit threat didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Sarah realized that someone had anticipated their investigations, someone who had enough influence to mobilize the police. Detective Johnson, she said, may I ask how long you've been working in this region? For 15 years. Why? Then you must remember the case of Emily Harrison's disappearance in 2019. How was the investigation conducted at the time? The detective hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. It was a difficult case. Ms. Harrison was an adult. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of crime. Cases of adults who disappear voluntarily are more common than people imagine. Sir, but there was evidence that she was investigating serious things here in town, Michael insisted. Wasn't that taken into consideration? Mr. Harrison, I'll be direct with you. I receive orders from my superiors, and my superiors receive pressure from important people. If you want some advice, forget this story and go back to Chicago. Some stones are better left unturned. The admission was so direct that everyone was shocked. The detective was practically confirming that there was a conspiracy to cover up what had happened to Emily. And if we don't want to forget? Sarah asked, a new determination growing in her voice. The detective looked at her with an expression that mixed pity and threat. Then I suggest you be very careful. Accidents happen, especially to people who ask too many questions in places where they shouldn't. After the police left, the three remained silent for several minutes, processing the gravity of the situation. They practically confirmed that there's a conspiracy, Michael finally said. And they threatened us, Sarah added, in broad daylight, in front of a witness. Pastor Robert was visibly shaken. My God, what kind of community did I raise my daughter in? How could I have been so blind all these years? Dad, you didn't know. None of us knew the extent of this. But I should have suspected. I should have asked questions. How many children suffered while I was concerned only with sermons and ceremonies? Michael approached the pastor. Mr. Mitchell, what matters now is what we do with what we know. And after that visit, it's clear that we're on the right track, or that we're putting ourselves in mortal danger, Sarah observed. Probably both. That night, after Michael went to the hotel where he was staying, Sarah couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house made her jump. Every shadow that moved outside seemed like a threat. The conversation with the detective had made it clear that they weren't dealing just with buried secrets, but with people who still had enough power to silence anyone who came close to the truth. Around 2 in the morning, her cell phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "Can't sleep. Are you okay?" She responded immediately. "Can't sleep either. I'm scared." "Can I come over?" Sarah hesitated. Receiving Michael at home in the middle of the night would be one more scandal for the community that had already condemned her. But after everything that had happened, the opinion of others seemed less important than her own safety and sanity. "Yes, come." 20 minutes later, Michael knocked softly on the back door. Sarah let him in, and they sat in the kitchen whispering so as not to wake her father. "I've been thinking about what the detective said," Michael murmured, holding her hands, "about accidents happening to people who ask too many questions. You think Emily didn't disappear voluntarily? I'm sure she didn't. My sister was brave, but she wasn't reckless. If she was in danger, she would have found a way to warn me, to ask for help. So you think she was murdered?" "Yes. I think she was murdered to silence her." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with terrible implications. "Michael, maybe we should stop. Maybe the detective is right. Maybe it's too dangerous to continue." "Do you want to stop?" Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the pain, the determination, the love he felt for her mixed with the desperate need to discover the truth about his sister. "No," she finally said. "I don't want to stop. I want to find out what happened to Emily. I want those responsible to pay for what they did. I want the victims to have justice. Even knowing it could be dangerous, especially knowing it could be dangerous. If not us, who will it be? If not now, when?" Michael leaned in and kissed her, a kiss full of gratitude and admiration. "I love you, Sarah. I love your courage, your integrity, your refusal to accept injustices. I love you too, and I love that you helped me find this courage within me." They decided that the next day they would go to the property in the mountains, where Emily had hidden the evidence. But first they needed to take some precautions. "Let's leave copies of everything we've discovered with someone trustworthy outside of town," Michael suggested. "And let's tell this person where we're going and when they should worry if they don't hear from us." "I know someone," Sarah said. "Jessica, my colleague from school. She moved to Nashville last month to work at a school there. I can trust her." "Perfect. And I'll notify my lawyer in Chicago too. If something happens to us, at least the information won't die with us." The next morning, Pastor Robert insisted on accompanying them to the mountains. "You're not going alone. If something happens, at least you'll have a witness." The journey to the former Harrison family property took 2.5 hours on increasingly deserted mountain roads. The house had been sold years before, but Michael still had a key to the small chapel that was at the back of the property, a location that the buyer hadn't shown interest in renovating. "This is where we used to hide our treasures," Michael explained, leading them to an old stone altar. "There's a loose stone down here." He moved some stones until he found one that yielded under pressure. Behind it, there was a hollow space where Emily had left an envelope sealed with wax. With trembling hands, Michael opened the envelope. Inside there were photographs, documents, and a letter addressed to him. "Mike," Sarah read the letter aloud, "if you're reading this, it means my suspicions about the danger were confirmed. What I discovered is worse than I imagined. It's not just about past abuse. It's about a scheme that continues to function to this day, involving child trafficking, child pornography, and blackmail of powerful people." Pastor Robert groaned as if he had received a punch to the stomach. "The photographs I leave here are just a sample of what exists. There is much more hidden in 3 different places, which I indicate on the attached map. But be careful. The people involved include politicians, businessmen, police officers, and even members of the clergy. They have a lot of power and won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose them." Sarah looked at the photographs quickly and had to look away. They were disturbing images of children in situations of abuse, Some clearly taken at the very school where she had worked for years. How could I work in that place without knowing any of this? She whispered, horrified. Because you were honest and innocent, Michael answered, putting his arm around her. Because you believed that people were basically good. In the final part of the letter, Pastor Robert continued reading, Emily writes, if something happens to me, don't trust the local police. There are at least 2 investigators involved in the scheme. Seek federal help, or better yet, from the national press. The only way to stop this is to make everything public at once, without giving them time to cover up the evidence. So that's what we'll do, Sarah said, an iron determination in her voice. We'll make everything public. Sarah, do you understand what this means? These people killed Emily to keep the secret. They won't hesitate to do the same to us. Then we have to be smarter than them. We have to act before they realize what we know. But when they left the chapel and walked back to the car, Sarah had the strange feeling that they were being watched. The surrounding mountains seemed to have eyes, and each movement of the vegetation caused by the wind seemed to hide a threatening presence. Michael, she whispered, someone is watching us. He followed her gaze and saw a reflection of light on the top of a distant hill, probably binoculars or a camera lens. Quick, let's get out of here. They ran to the car, but when Michael tried to start the engine, nothing happened. He tried again and again. The car was completely dead. Someone sabotaged the car, Pastor Robert said, looking nervously around. Or installed some device to prevent us from leaving, Michael added, trying once more without success. It was then that they heard the sound of engines approaching. 2 cars were coming up the mountainous road toward them, raising clouds of dust. We have to get out of here on foot, Michael said, taking the envelope with the evidence. Now. They ran for the dense woods that surrounded the property, hearing the sound of the cars getting closer and closer. Sarah had never run so much in her life, her lungs burning with the effort, but the adrenaline of fear kept her moving. This way, Michael indicated a trail that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. I've known these mountains since childhood. Behind them they could hear men's voices, clearly in pursuit. They couldn't distinguish the words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. After an hour of running and hiding, they finally reached a rural road where they managed to stop a truck driver who took them back to town. During the entire journey, Sarah couldn't stop trembling, not just from fear but from an intense anger against the people who had transformed her peaceful life into a desperate escape. Now there's no turning back, she said to Michael when they finally arrived home, exhausted and dirty. They know that we know, it's all or nothing. Are you sure? Because from now on our lives will never be the same. Sarah looked at the evidence they had managed to rescue, thought of Emily who had died trying to expose the truth, thought of the children who could still be suffering while they hesitated. I'm sure. Let's end this once and for all. But none of them could imagine that at that exact moment, very powerful people were meeting in a secret room, planning how to silence them permanently before the truth came to light. The hunt had only begun, and Sarah was about to discover that love sometimes requires sacrifices that go far beyond what she ever imagined she would be willing to make. The dawn of Monday found Sarah and Michael in a small inn in the mountains, 50 miles from Hope Springs. They had spent the night awake, organizing the evidence found in the chapel and trying to create a plan to disclose it without being killed first. Pastor Robert dozed in an armchair, exhausted by the tension of the last few days, but still refusing to abandon the two in such a dangerous situation. Sarah was bent over the table, studying the documents that Emily had left, when Michael approached with 2 cups of coffee. I found something, she said, pointing to a sheet of paper with handwritten notes. Emily made a list of names. Some I recognize. They're people who still live in town who have important positions. Michael sat beside her, so close that their shoulders touched. Even amid the chaos, his physical proximity still caused that familiar acceleration in her heart. Let me see. He took the list and frowned. Dr. Thomas, president of the school board, Sheriff Anthony Burke, Councilman James Rivers. My God, these are people who control the town. And here, Sarah pointed to another note from Emily. She writes about a specific location where the criminal activities take place. Riverside Ranch, property of businessman Mark Peterson, located 15 miles from town, rural road with no exit. That's where the bi-weekly meetings happen, always on nights of the new moon. Bi-weekly. That means a meeting must have happened recently. Or will happen soon, Sarah calculated quickly. The next new moon is in 3 days. Michael stood up and began to pace the room, clearly agitated. Sarah, do you realize what this means? We're talking about extremely powerful people with unlimited resources. If we try to expose them head-on, we won't last 24 hours. So, what do you suggest? We need help, real help from people who have enough power to face this conspiracy. Sarah picked up her cell phone and called Jessica, who had moved to Nashville. During the conversation, she briefly explained the situation and asked her friend to deliver copies of the evidence to an investigative journalist from a major newspaper. Jessica, it's a matter of life and death, she said. If you don't hear from us in 48 hours, publish everything, no matter the consequences. After hanging up, she turned to Michael. Now we have a safety net. If something happens to us, the truth will be revealed anyway. That may not be enough to protect us now, but it may be enough for our death to have meaning. The way he said this, with such a calm acceptance of the possibility of death, made Sarah realize the real gravity of the situation. They weren't just playing detectives, they were risking their lives against a scheme that had functioned for decades. Michael, she approached him, taking his hands, I need to tell you something. If we don't get out of this situation alive, I want you to know that I don't regret anything. Meeting you, falling in love with you, discovering who I really am, it was worth it. Don't talk like that, he pulled her into his arms. We'll get out of this. We'll expose all these criminals, we'll get justice for Emily, and then we'll build a life together far away from all this. Do you promise? I promise that I'll fight for it with all my strength. When they kissed, it was different from all the other kisses they had shared. There was a desperate intensity, as if they were sealing a pact that could be broken only by death. Pastor Robert woke up with the sound of the conversation and joined them at the table. Daughter, son, he said, and Sarah noticed that he had referred to Michael as son. I've been praying all night, asking God for guidance on what to do, and I received an answer. What answer, Dad? That sometimes God puts us in impossible situations not to punish us, but to give us the opportunity to do what is right, regardless of the consequences. Meaning that we're going to report all of this. We're going to the federal police, to the national press. We're going to make enough noise so that they can't silence us. Michael looked at the pastor with new admiration. Mr. Mitchell, this is extremely dangerous, are you sure? I'm sure that I prefer to die trying to do what is right than to live knowing that I could have prevented children from suffering and did nothing. At that moment, Sarah's cell phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she decided to answer. Ms. Mitchell? The voice on the other end was female, young but laden with fear. Yes, who is this? My name is Kathy. Kathy Miller. I'm the daughter of former pastor John Miller. Sarah signaled for Michael and her father to come closer to listen to the conversation. Kathy, where are you? How did you get my number? I've been in Chicago for 15 years. I got your number through a friend who told me that you're investigating what happened in our town. I need to talk to you urgently. About what? About my father? About the things he did, about why we had to flee in the middle of the night in 1995. Sarah felt her heart accelerate. Kathy, can you come here? Or would you prefer that we come? To you? I can't go back to Tennessee. They're still looking for me. But I can meet you at the state border in a neutral city. They arranged to meet late that afternoon in a city 2 hours away. Kathy said she would bring documents that her father had kept before he died, evidence that could be the key to unmasking the entire conspiracy. During the trip, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how her life had completely changed in a matter of weeks. 2 months ago, her biggest concern was choosing which book to recommend for the next class reading. Now she was fleeing from powerful criminals, risking her life to expose a conspiracy that involved child trafficking. Do you regret it? Michael asked, as if reading her thoughts. Regret what? Having met me. Having gotten into this situation. Sarah looked at him. The man who had transformed her life so radically, who had awakened in her a passion she didn't know existed, who had given meaning and purpose to an existence that before seemed empty. Never, she answered without hesitation. Even if this ends badly, I will never regret it. Kathy. Miller was waiting in a small cafe in the city where they had arranged to meet. She was a woman of approximately 40 years, prematurely grey hair, eyes that carried the weight of secrets kept for decades. Thank you for coming, she said when they sat down. When I heard that someone was finally investigating what happened in Hope Springs, I knew it was my chance to finally get justice. What do you know about your father? Pastor Robert asked directly. Kathy sighed deeply before answering. My father was the leader of the scheme. He used his position as pastor to identify vulnerable families, children that no one would miss. Then he offered them to powerful men in exchange for money and political favors. The revelation was even more shocking than they expected. Sarah felt nauseous imagining how everything had functioned under the facade of a religious community. How did you discover this? I was a teenager. One night I woke up and saw my father talking with strange men in our house. I was curious, so I hid to listen. They were negotiating children as if they were merchandise. And you never told anyone. Who would I tell? My father was respected, powerful. Who would believe a traumatized teenager? Besides, he threatened me, said that if I told anyone he would send me away and that no one would ever find me. Kathy took a folder of documents from her bag. But when he died 5 years ago, I found these papers hidden at home. Lists of names, photographs, financial records, everything he kept as life insurance. Michael took the documents and began to examine them. My God, this is evidence enough to bring down half of the elite of Hope Springs. There's more, Kathy continued. My father wasn't just the local leader. The scheme was much bigger, involved several cities, several networks. There was a hierarchy, with very powerful people at the top, people you would never imagine. Who? Federal politicians, multinational businessmen, even people from the media who should be exposing these things. Sarah felt as if the world were crumbling around her. The extent of the corruption was much greater than they had imagined. Kathy, did my sister Emily discover these things? Emily? Kathy seemed confused. I don't have a sister named Emily. Emily Harrison, Michael clarified. She was investigating the case 5 years ago, when she disappeared. Ah, yes, the journalist. She sought me out in Chicago, shortly. Before she disappeared, I was afraid to talk, but she was very persistent. I ended up telling her some things, but I didn't give her these documents. Why? Because I knew that if they found out I had physical evidence, they would kill me. I preferred to let her think that I knew less than I actually knew. But do you know what happened to her? I know that she was getting dangerously close to the truth. And I know that certain people wouldn't allow her to live to tell this story. The confirmation that Emily had been murdered hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. Even though he suspected, hearing it from someone who knew the details of the conspiracy made everything more real, more painful. Kathy, Sarah said softly, would you be willing to testify publicly, to put your face to this complaint? I'm tired of living in hiding. I'm tired of carrying this weight alone. If you believe there's a chance we can get justice, I'll go with you to the end. That night, gathered at a hotel in the same city, they elaborated a plan. Kathy knew journalists in Chicago who could help, people who weren't involved in the scheme. Michael had contacts in the federal police through his business. Pastor Robert offered to speak with religious leaders of other denominations, people who could pressure for an independent investigation. Let's do this in a coordinated way, Michael explained. Tomorrow morning, simultaneously, we'll deliver the evidence to 3 different sources: federal police, national press, and human rights organizations. That way, even if they try to silence one source, the other 2 will still have the information. And if they try to silence us before that, Sarah asked, it's a risk we have to take, but if we stay together, if we don't separate, maybe we can protect each other. But what they didn't know was that their movements had been monitored for days. That same night, on an isolated ranch on the outskirts of Hope Springs, a group of powerful men was meeting to discuss the problem that Sarah and Michael had become. "They know too much," said a voice in the darkness of the room, "and now they have physical evidence. We can no longer try to discredit them or intimidate them." "What are you suggesting?" asked another voice. "I'm suggesting that we do with them the same thing we did with the journalist 5 years ago. Accidents happen, especially on mountain roads at night." "And the pastor?" "Him too. We can't leave witnesses." "And the daughter of John Miller? Does she know where they are?" "Our contacts in Chicago are locating her. She will also be taken care of." The next morning, Sarah woke up with a strange feeling, as if something terrible was about to happen. She looked through the hotel window and saw that the parking lot was busier than it should be in a small town on a Tuesday morning. "Michael," she gently shook him. "Wake up, something's wrong." He woke up immediately with the sharpened instincts of someone who had spent days in a state of alert. "What is it?" "Look outside. Too many cars, too many people circulating. It's not normal." Michael looked through the window and his expression became tense. "Let's get out of here, now." They woke up Pastor Robert and Kathy, quickly explaining the situation. In 15 minutes, they were in the car, trying to leave town without drawing attention. But when they reached the main road, they found a police roadblock. There was no way to avoid it. "Documents, please." The police officer approached the driver's window. Michael handed over the documents, trying to stay calm. Sarah could see that the officer was nervous, sweating despite the morning chill. "Where are you headed?" "Nashville. Work matters." The officer examined the documents for longer than necessary, clearly stalling for time. Sarah noticed that he made a discreet signal to other officers. "You'll have to come with us to the station. There's a search and seizure order against you." "Order for what?" Pastor Robert asked. "Criminal association, slander, defamation, you're under arrest." Sarah knew that if they were taken to the local police station, they would never come out alive. The evidence they carried would disappear, and they would be 3 more victims of accidents or suicides in jail. "Michael," she whispered, "we can't go with them." "I know." When the officer stepped away to talk to his colleagues, Michael started the engine and stepped on the accelerator. The car lurched violently, passing through the improvised barrier of the roadblock. "They're going to chase us," Kathy shouted from the back seat. "I know an alternative road," Michael responded, making a dangerous turn, "but it's going to be risky." Behind them, they could hear sirens approaching. The chase had begun, and Sarah knew their lives depended on reaching Nashville before they were caught. "Dad!" she shouted over the noise of the engine. "Pray for us." "I've been praying, daughter, for 15 minutes. The alternative road that Michael chose was a sequence of winding curves in the mountains, dangerous even in normal conditions. With the rain that had begun to fall, driving there at high speed became almost suicidal. But they had no choice. Behind them, 3 police cars were in pursuit, and Sarah could see that they weren't just police officers. There were private cars too, armed men who clearly weren't interested in arresting them, but in permanently silencing them. "There ahead," Michael pointed to a sign. "There's a gas station. I'll try to get there. It's a public place with security cameras. They won't want to act with witnesses." But when they arrived at the gas station, they found it mysteriously closed. There was no one there. The lights were off. The security cameras had been turned off. "It's a trap," Kathy said, and her voice was full of terror. "They control everything. There's nowhere to run." It was then that Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Stop the car," she said to Michael. "What?" "Stop the car now." Michael obeyed, confused. Sarah got out of the vehicle and began to walk toward the cars that were pursuing them, hands raised. "Sarah, no!" Michael shouted, but she continued walking. When the cars stopped and the men got out, Sarah confronted them with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I know who you are," she shouted. "I know what you did to Emily Harrison. I know about the crimes you covered up for decades." "Shut up," one of the men growled, pointing a gun at her. "I won't shut up, and you can't silence me, because if something happens to me, to any of us, everything will be published. Newspapers, television, internet, the whole world will know what kind of monsters you are." You're bluffing. Am I? Then kill me. Kill all of us right here. And see what happens when our death is reported, along with all the evidence that's already in the hands of journalists in 3 different states. The man hesitated, clearly uncertain. Besides, Sarah continued, I recorded everything. This entire chase, all the threats, it's being broadcast live to people who are recording everything. You've already lost. The only question now is whether you prefer to be judged as criminals or as murderers too. It wasn't true. She wasn't broadcasting anything live, but the bluff worked. The men began to back away, realizing they had been outmaneuvered. This isn't over, one of them shouted before getting into the car. No, Sarah replied. It's not over. It's over for you. When the cars drove away, Michael ran to embrace her. Are you crazy? You could have been killed. I could have, but I didn't die. And they know they can no longer silence us without causing a bigger scandal than what they're trying to avoid. Pastor Robert was crying when he approached them. Daughter, I've never been so proud of you. You've become the bravest woman I've ever known. I learned from you, Dad. I learned that sometimes doing what's right requires courage we don't know we have. Kathy was also emotional. Sarah, you did it. They backed down. For the first time in decades, they backed down. But Sarah knew that the fight was just beginning. They had won a battle, but the war for justice would be long and difficult. Let's go to Nashville, she said. We have evidence to deliver, journalists to talk to, and a truth to tell the world. As they drove away from the mountains where they had faced danger, Sarah held Michael's hand and thought about how love had transformed not only her life, but her very nature. She had become a warrior, a woman capable of facing the worst horrors of humanity to protect the innocent and seek justice. And she knew that alongside Michael, she would be able to face anything the future might bring. 6 months after that, morning in the mountains, when Sarah confronted armed men to protect the truth, she was sitting in the witness stand of a federal court in Washington, D.C., wearing a navy blue suit that Michael had chosen for her. Her voice echoed firmly through the room packed with journalists as she recounted, for the 3rd time in a public hearing, all the horrors they had discovered. Mr. Prosecutor, she answered the question he had asked her, the evidence we presented leaves no doubt. For decades, a criminal network operated freely in Hope Springs and other cities, protected by corrupt authorities. Emily Harrison was murdered because she was about to expose this network, and if we hadn't acted when we did, other children would continue to suffer. In the audience, Michael watched her with an overflowing pride. In the last 6 months, he had seen his wife, because now she was officially his wife, transform into one of the country's most powerful voices in the fight against child exploitation. Sarah had found her true calling, and it was even more impressive than any literature class she had ever taught. The trial was coming to an end. 17 people had been arrested, including the former sheriff, 3 councilmen, 2 businessmen, and even a county judge. The scandal had reverberated nationally, leading to the creation of new child protection laws and a complete overhaul of the security system in small American towns. But for Sarah, the most important moment of the trial was yet to come. I'd like to make a final statement, Your Honor, she asked the judge. Proceed, Mrs. Harrison. The name still sounded strange to her ears, Sarah Mitchell Harrison. They had gotten married 3 months earlier, in a simple ceremony in Nashville, with only the closest friends and Pastor Robert officiating. It was the most beautiful wedding she could have imagined without pomp, but full of true love and support from people who really mattered. Your Honor, throughout my life, I was taught that a virtuous woman should be silent, obedient, that she should accept the world as it is without questioning. But I discovered that true virtue lies in fighting against injustice, in protecting the vulnerable, in refusing to accept that children be hurt to protect the reputation of adults. Her voice was firm, but laden with emotion. Emily Harrison died because she had the courage to ask the right questions. Her death was not in vain if we can ensure that no other person is silenced for seeking the truth. I ask this court to apply the maximum penalty to the defendants, not for revenge, but to send a clear message. In our country, there is not enough power to protect those who hurt children. When she stepped down from the witness stand, Sarah,